All right, let's dive in. We're going deep into the age of reason and the scientific revolution today.
Exciting times, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating to see how, well, for one thing, how scientific discoveries really shook things up, challenged the whole idea of where humanity fits in the universe.
Absolutely.
How did these radical new ideas spread? And how did it all lead to revolutions? Revolutions that, well, shape the world we live in today.
Yeah, it's a period of immense change. Old ways of thinking crumbled as new ideas emerged.
Right, exactly. To understand it, maybe we should rewind a bit first.
Okay.
Go back to the Renaissance. I mean, that's where the seeds are planted.
Yeah.
You had this surge in human reason, creativity, but it kind of clashed with centuries of, well, religious doctrine.
Right.
So as the scientific revolution gained momentum, how did that tension play out?
Well, it wasn't a sudden break. Imagine a world where everyone's understanding of the cosmos, their place in it, was totally tied to their religious beliefs.
Right.
Then in 1543, Nicholas Copernicus comes along with his book De Revolutionibus Orbius Coelestium, proposing something radical.
Oh.
He said the Earth wasn't the center of the universe after all.
Wow.
Just another planet going around the sun.
That must have been, well, not exactly Earth-centered, but definitely Earth-shattering, right? How did people react to that? I mean, going against such a deeply held worldview?
There was resistance, a lot of it. Not just from, religious leaders, but even some scientists pushed back. It took a while for his heliocentric model to catch on.
I bet.
But Copernicus wasn't alone.
Right.
You had Johannes Kepler with his laws of planetary motion, all mathematical and precise, and Galileo.
Galileo.
This telescope, he saw Jupiter's moons, Venus's phases.
Oh, wow.
They all added to this new understanding of the universe.
And then there's Newton, right? Didn't he kind of bring it all together with his law of universal gravitation?
Absolutely.
I vaguely remember it from school, but honestly, it's a bit fuzzy now.
Oh, sure.
Could you maybe, give us a refresher on one of Newton's laws? How it works?
Okay, let's take his second law of motion. It says the force on an object equals its mass times its acceleration.
Okay.
Might sound a bit abstract, but it explains why, say, a heavier thing needs more force to move at the same speed as a lighter thing.
Right.
And this same law, on a grand scale, explains the orbits of planets around the sun.
So it's not just about planets and stars, it's about understanding these fundamental laws that govern everything, from tiny particles to huge celestial bodies.
Exactly.
Incredible.
Right.
But it wasn't just astronomy, right? The scientific revolution, it changed how we approach knowledge itself.
Oh, absolutely. Thinkers like Francis Bacon and René Descartes, they championed observation and experimentation, reason as the basis of knowledge, not just relying on, ancient texts or religious authorities.
Very questioning, testing, proving things.
Exactly. It was all about empirical evidence.
And this new way of thinking had a ripple effect, right? Like in medicine and art, they were making new discoveries that challenged old assumptions.
You're right. Andreas Vesalius, for example. He revolutionized anatomy with his detailed studies of the human body.
I'd heard of him.
Published it all in De Humani Corporis Fabrica. Challenged a lot of old beliefs based on Galen's ancient texts.
Wow.
Paved the way for a more accurate understanding of anatomy, which of course was important for surgery and treating diseases.
And wasn't that also when William Harvey figured out how blood circulates?
Yes. In the 17th century, that was a huge breakthrough.
It was.
And then you have Antony van Leeuwenhoek, who opened up a whole new world with his microscope.
Microscopes,
Seeing microorganisms, things we couldn't even see before.
So the scientific revolution wasn't just these big theories. It was about real advancements that changed our understanding of the world and our place in it.
Absolutely.
But how did this spirit of scientific inquiry, how did it affect how people thought about society, about government? That's where the Enlightenment comes in.
Exactly. The Enlightenment took these principles, reason, observation, all those changing science, and applied it to human affairs.
Okay.
The big question was, how can we build a more rational, more just society based on natural laws and human rights?
And that's where John Locke comes in, with his ideas about natural rights, life, liberty, property.
Right.
Hugely influential in the American Revolution.
Yes.
But was Locke the only voice? I mean, we always seem to focus on him when we talk about the Enlightenment, but weren't there others who helped shape this movement?
Well, Locke was definitely important, but the Enlightenment had so many voices, There's a whole bunch of different ideas all coming together.
Right.
Take Montesquieu, for example. Charles Louis II, Baron de Montesquieu.
Okay.
Quite a name.
Yeah, it is.
His book, The Spirit of the Laws. It explored different types of government. And he really pushed for this idea of separation of powers.
That's dividing government into different branches, right? Like legislative, executive, judicial, pretty fundamental to how democracies work today.
Yeah, but back then it was a pretty radical idea.
Was it?
Yeah.
I mean, did he get any pushback for that?
Oh, absolutely. Limiting the power of a king or a single ruling group, that didn't sit well with a lot of people.
Right. Those in power probably weren't too keen on sharing.
Exactly. But Montesquieu's argument was that dividing power would prevent tyranny and protect individual liberty.
Okay, so it's about checks and balances.
Exactly. A system designed to, prevent anyone from abusing their power.
So it wasn't just about getting rid of monarchs altogether. It was about creating systems that would protect individual rights.
Exactly.
I see a theme emerging here.
Right.
But the Enlightenment wasn't just about, political theory, was it?
No.
There was this push for religious tolerance, too, freedom of thought.
Right.
I'm thinking of Voltaire, with his wit and all his critiques of religious dogma.
Voltaire, he was all about freedom of expression and religious tolerance.
Yeah.
Now, he was critical of organized religion, for sure, all the abuses that came with it. But I wouldn't say he was an atheist necessarily. He believed in a supreme being.
Okay.
But rejected blind faith and superstition.
So reason was the key for him.
Exactly. For Voltaire, reason was the path to enlightenment. And religious fanaticism.
Yeah.
He saw it as a threat to individual liberty and social harmony.
And it wasn't just Voltaire, right? We mentioned deism earlier. What was that all about? How did that fit into the whole Enlightenment picture?
Deism. That's an interesting one. It was a movement that gained traction during the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Deists, they believed in a higher power, a creator who set the universe in motion according to these natural laws.
Okay.
But they didn't like organized religion or dogma.
Interesting.
They said reason and observation were the ways to understand the divine.
Right.
And a lot of thinkers like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, they were influenced by deism. They saw no conflict between faith and reason.
It's fascinating how they tried to reconcile those two things, their belief in a creator with their commitment to scientific inquiry. But the Enlightenment wasn't just about these abstract ideas, right? It affected people's lives, especially women.
Oh, yeah.
Mary Wollstonecraft, in her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, she argued that women were just as capable of reason and intellectual pursuits as men.
Yeah, Wollstonecraft, she was revolutionary for her time.
She was.
Challenging traditional gender roles and saying women deserve equal opportunities for education and, just living fulfilling lives.
Right.
Her ideas, they were met with mixed reactions.
I can imagine.
Some people loved her, called for equality. Others, they clung to the traditional view of women's roles in society.
It reminds us that progress isn't always a straight line.
Definitely not.
Speaking of progress, though, we've been focusing on the good stuff about the Enlightenment. But weren't there some downsides, too? This emphasis on reason and progress, history is rarely black and white, right?
You're right, the Enlightenment had its shadows, too.
Like what?
Well, for one, the development of more destructive military technologies, initially seen as progress, right? But they also led to more devastating wars.
A classic example of the double-edged sword, right?
Exactly.
And then there's the French Revolution.
Yeah.
Inspired by Enlightenment ideals, but also, descended into violence and terror.
It did.
It's like a warning sign, isn't it? That even the best ideas can go wrong.
The French Revolution, with its cry of liberty, equality, fraternity.
Yeah.
It did embody the hopes of the Enlightenment, but it also showed how complex, how difficult, radical social and political change can be.
And speaking of the French Revolution, we can't forget Napoleon.
Napoleon, right.
He was a product of this era.
He was.
A brilliant military strategist who came to power during the revolution.
Yeah.
But then he became an emperor.
He did.
A dictator, really. Consolidating power, waging wars all across Europe. How do we square that with the Enlightenment ideals of liberty and individual rights?
Napoleon's a complex figure, for sure.
Yeah, he is.
On the one hand, he embraced some Enlightenment principles, like legal reform, the spread of education.
Right, like the Napoleonic Code.
Exactly. Modernized European law, emphasized equality before the law, protecting property rights.
But on the other hand, he suppressed dissent, centralized power, and his military campaigns led to so much death.
They did.
It's like he embodied both the good and the bad of the Enlightenment.
You did. Embraced some ideals, betrayed others.
It's a reflection of the era itself, isn't it? Full of contradictions.
Napoleon's legacy is a reminder that progress is rarely straightforward.
Right.
It can be messy, contradictory, and often has unintended consequences.
And it highlights how important it is to protect individual rights, even when those rights are, supposedly being promoted in the name of progress.
Exactly.
It seems like we keep coming back to this idea of balancing progress with individual liberty.
We do.
A recurring theme throughout the Enlightenment.
And still relevant today.
Absolutely. The Enlightenment wasn't just a moment in history.
No.
It's an ongoing process.
Of questioning, challenging, striving for something better.
Right. Finding that balance between freedom and responsibility.
Between reason and compassion.
Yeah.
Between progress and, well, doing what's right.
Exactly. It's really amazing how these ideals from so long ago are still relevant to the problems we face today.
Right.
We've got political polarization, climate change, AI. It's like we're at another turning point in history.
And that's exactly why it's so important to look back at the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
It reminds us about reason, critical thinking, the importance of talking openly about these complex issues.
Right. But the Enlightenment wasn't just about, intellectual debates.
Yes.
It led to real change in the world.
It did.
Revolutions, declarations of independence, new governments. What do you think are the biggest, the most lasting impacts of this era, the things we still see today?
One of the most important legacies, I think, is this idea of individual rights and freedoms.
Yeah.
The idea that everyone is born with certain rights, rights that the government can't just take away. That was a huge shift from how things were before. It laid the foundation for modern democracies, and it still inspires movements for social justice and equality all over the world.
It's true. We kind of take those rights for granted sometimes.
Thank you.
But they were hard fought, and they're still being challenged today.
Absolutely.
It's a constant struggle to protect those ideals. But it wasn't just about individual rights, was it?
No.
The Enlightenment also emphasized reason, evidence-based decision-making.
Right. Think about the scientific revolution.
Okay.
Observation, experimentation, the search for knowledge. This way of understanding the world based on evidence and reason, it's had a huge impact on everything. Medicine, technology, economics, how we make public policy.
So the Enlightenment gave us this framework for critical thinking and problem solving that we still use today.
It did.
But we also have to acknowledge, the complexities, the contradictions of this era.
Of course, it wasn't perfect.
Right. It wasn't all good.
Sometimes this focus on reason and progress, it came at the expense of tradition, of emotion, even spiritual values. And as we saw with Napoleon, even the best ideas can be used for the wrong reasons.
It's a good reminder.
It is.
So we can't just blindly follow the ideals of the Enlightenment. We have to engage with them critically, thoughtfully.
Absolutely.
Understand their strengths and weaknesses and figure out how to apply them to the challenges we face today.
Exactly. We can be inspired by the Enlightenment's focus on reason, individual liberty, progress, but we also need to be aware of its limitations, its potential problems.
Right. It's a balancing act.
It is. It needs constant dialogue, constant reflection.
And that's what we've tried to do in this deep dive, right? To
Yes.
look at the age of reason and the scientific revolution, not just as some event in the past,
Right.
but as this living force that's still shaping our world.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Okay.
Given everything we've talked about, all the complexities of the Enlightenment, how do you think we can best uphold its ideals, reason, progress, individual rights in our own time?
It is something to think about, for sure.
It is, as we face all the challenges and the opportunities of the 21st century.
Well, thank you for joining us on this journey through the age of reason and the scientific revolution.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, maybe even a little inspiring.
I hope so.
Remember, the pursuit of knowledge, this quest for a better world, it never really ends.
It doesn't.
We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas to see how they connect to our lives today. So until next time, stay curious and keep those minds open.